Okay, we're going to give it a few more seconds to let everyone get joined, and then we'll get started. Okay, thanks everyone for joining us today for From Tiger King to Pet Store Puppies. My name is Blair Bennett, and I am a member of the CLE committee and the Animal Welfare Committee. So we are working on this month's CLE together. Today we have Shelby Boboski and Lauren Loney with us. They are both licensed attorneys. Shelby is the executive director at the Texas Humane Legislation Network. Before that, she was president of the board for the Texas Humane Legislation Network. Lauren is the Texas State Director for the Humane Society, and they're going to discuss some of the most recent like Texas legislation and stuff that's been happening with the animals.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. My name is Shelby Boboski. Thank you so much, Blair. And I've got my good friend Lauren on the webinar today, and we're going to be talking about some of the bills that recently just happened as the session wrapped up. As you all may or may not know, Texas politics is front and center right now because the Texas Democrats left during the special session. I believe they're in DC right now. And things are definitely now continuing and heating up even more. But this is going to be the focus of the current or the 2021 regular legislative session and what happened. So animals in politics, there have been a lot of posts. We can always see animals affecting politics in some way or another. I put the two dogs because there are two dogs back in the White House. Unfortunately, one of their dogs passed away recently, but they had their shepherds up there. There's a picture of Ted Cruz's dog, Snowflake, that really hit the media back when we had Snowvid. There's actually now a National Dogs in Politics Day. And I think most importantly is I put the middle picture up there, and that is a picture of Congressman Mark Vesey and also Roger Williams. Congressman Vesey is from the Arlington area, and Congressman Williams is from the Austin area. And there's one Democrat and one Republican. And that is what Lauren and I like to say about animal issues, is that it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. If you have a common sense animal welfare bill or bill relating to animals, then it really shouldn't matter what political party you're from, because everybody, well, at least 2/3 of Texans own a pet, and everybody has animals in their lives. So this is from 2017, actually. It was the National Pet Adoption Days on April 11th, and the National Pet Adoption Month is the month of April. So it's just an example of, people from both parties coming together and passing bipartisan legislation. Why are Texas politics different in terms of animal issues? Lauren and I have, and Lauren working with HSUS, and I'd like to get her take. It's interesting because in other states, bills can sail through and pass. And in Texas, it's not that easy. And we need to look at some of the things that affect that. For example, we are a heavy ag state. And so, sometimes some of the bills kind of seem like a camel's nose under the tent. We also have this spirit behind us that we are independent. And animals in Texas are seen under Texas law as property. And that can affect things. Texas is a predominantly red state. Again, though, as we'll see in a lot of the bills that were brought this session, many Republicans brought bills, so that doesn't really affect it. but it goes into certain portions of the party. For example, the Texas Freedom Caucus. You know, they were founded by members committed to, among other things, restraining government and revitalizing personal and economic freedoms in the state of Texas. And with respect to animal issues, sometimes it has to deal with regulation. You have to regulate certain areas. And so if you have a force of your legislature that is there to kill those bills, it's much more difficult to pass. So we could have an hour-long conversation on this, and I don't want to take too much time, but Lauren, what do you think? Do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think that you really like hit the nail on the head there, Shelby. And I just think from I'm based in Austin, but of course I work for a national organization, so I have the sort of inside scoop on how a lot of these campaigns go in other states. And I think what's really interesting is that successes in other states don't depend on whether that state is a red state or a blue state, right? We have successes and losses across the board that's not always affiliated with politics. And I think that Texas is a particularly challenging space because our strong desire, and you can see this in all the outreach, all the constituent outreach that we have going on, our strong across the state desire and love of animals doesn't always translate into passing these kind of common sense laws. So in Texas, we really do, I think sometimes animal issues, they just get a little bit caught up in everything else that's going on. And but it truly is not it's hard to find patterns really in terms of where animal issues are going, animal bills are going to be successful or not successful. And I think Texas is particularly true in that regard.
Excellent. So the 2021 legislative session was very interesting. As you guys all know, we basically started during COVID. We think it's safe to say that the 87th session was a historic one. COVID upended institutional routines. It limited and eliminated, in many cases, face-to-face interactions with legislators and legislative staff to discuss policies and legislation. And there was really uncertainty in the beginning of the legislative session about access to the Texas Capitol, differing rules for how each chamber would conduct their business. And then we saw, COVID really did change everything. And here are just some pictures. There were huge tents that Lauren and I had to enter and get COVID. We got tested in the beginning. Once we got our vaccine, you got a bracelet. But there was definitely limited access to many of the offices. I show a picture in the bottom right there demonstrating that, because of the riots and what happened in DC, the Capitol was on high alert. And there was just way more security this session. But things started to change with the rollout of the vaccines, and advocates, returned to the Capitol building. And the process was limited for much of the session, but things did end up coming a little bit back to normal. And you can see that in the bills that were passed. I put a picture here. This is Governor Abbott. The Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and then that is the former speaker, because in COVID, we did not have a picture like this with the current speaker. This is from 2019. That is the governor's dog. And again, it just goes back to animal bills in Texas. Here are the three most powerful people on the first day of the legislature, and what's bringing them together, the governor's dog. To go back to why, it might be much easier in Illinois to pass a bill that ends the sale of pet store puppies and not in Texas. Texas is different too, in that we convene every other year for 6 months. And this year, approximately 7,000 bills were filed. So imagine that. Imagine being a staffer and having to know all 7,000 bills, because that's essentially what you need to do when you work there. But this year, only 1,181 bills passed, and 20 were vetoed, and we're going to talk about one of those. Our organization followed over 100 bills, and if you go back, we're reworking our website right now, but any questions on animal bills, please reach out to Lauren and I. We're more than happy to discuss them. In the House, there are 83 Republicans, 67 Democrats. In the Senate, 18 Republicans and 13 Democrats. But also, you know, snowpocalypse also wrought its own havoc. The Capitol shut down for more than a week. Laura, if you remember, we had extended power outages, especially in Austin, where a lot of the legislators were staying. We had some must-pass legislation with respect to ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. But as you can see, Republicans maintained all statewide offices, and Dade Phelan was the new speaker from Beaumont, and his interest aligned with Abbott and Patrick, and it made for a conservative session. So how does a bill become a law? Well, this is incredibly boring and we're going to skip over this, but this is really the easiest way to look at it. A bill is filed in the House and or Senate or both, and they go through the different channels. So it is a lot of work. Again, when you see that 7,000 bills, I always think of it as like a hurricane coming out and just spitting out a couple at the very end, because you have to pass in both chambers. You have to have committee hearings in both chambers. And then you have floor debate, and then you have a vote. And then ultimately, if you're lucky, it gets to the governor's desk. And even when you get that far, there is still a veto. So I think the best thing to watch still is if you have children, I'm Just a Bill, Schoolhouse Rock. It's the best way to explain it. And it pretty much still holds true. Animal laws in Texas are located in the Texas Health and Safety Code and the Texas Penal Code, but a lot of statutes authorize DSHS to enact rules under the administrative code. So when you see all the codes coming up here, this is where you can find a lot of the animal laws. So we are going to talk about the session updates. First one, we are going to talk about the bills that passed and then that didn't. So the sales tax exemption on adoption fees. I will tell you that this was an incredibly important bill to pass, and it was very popular. And I know some of the attorneys on this call, you guys might sit on nonprofit boards for rescues or some of the shelters. We might have some shelter commissioners. So what was happening is there was a lawsuit that was brought up a couple of years ago. And in that lawsuit, in a venue issue on where the case should be held, one of the arguments was that these dogs that are being adopted there should be a tax from them. Current law before this law passed basically said that if you are in a brick and mortar building like the SPCA of Dallas or Operation Kindness, you know, there was no tax on the sale of those dogs. And I hate even saying sale because actually they are being adopted, right? We are not, rescues are not in the process of, selling animals. They're there so they don't get euthanized. But if you were not a brick and mortar building, a couple of years ago, the Texas Comptroller's Office started sending huge bills to rescues. In fact, I think Legacy Boxer got a back charge of over $30,000. So this bill was widely supported by both sides and said, listen, if you are adopting out dogs, whether you're an individual or you're with your own C3, you just don't have a brick and mortar, you should not have to pay tax on that. And Senator Nelson, who actually just went ahead and announced her retirement, passed this, and it was a really important bill. Lauren, and I'm sure with the rescues you work with, this was really important for HSUS to get this done as well. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea that nonprofits should be paying tax is, not only seems to be in violation of tax exempt status as a nonprofit, but it's clear that whatever funds rescues are bringing in as a result of their adoption fees are part of a nonprofit purpose, your tax exempt purpose. But this, having to pay sales taxes would be hugely detrimental to particularly our smaller breed specific rescues who do rely on those adoption fees for the continued care of the animals that they have in their system. So absolutely.
Good. This was an important bill. We called this bill the Courthouse Dogs Bill. So we all know that the prevalence of therapy dogs in courtrooms has really increased in recent years. I'm not sure who we have on the call today, but if you at all do any kind of criminal law, bringing in a young victim to testify against someone that may have molested this victim sitting right there is incredibly stressful and traumatizing. And in 2019, our federal senator, John Cornyn, brought a bill. He was one of the authors to allow certified facility dogs into federal courtrooms. And it actually passed in the federal Senate, but then died in the House. But facility and therapy dogs weren't really allowed in state courtrooms in Texas. They were, but there were a lot of roadblocks, so to speak, as the people testified in support of this bill. So now in Texas, well, starting September 1st, it authorizes the presence of qualified facility dogs or qualified therapy dogs in certain court proceedings. And it amends the Texas Government Code to authorize a party and an action to petition the court for the use of one of these dogs. And it's really interesting in terms of the testimony on this bill, because understandably, some of the defense attorneys didn't want, a victim coming in and the jury seeing the victim and this, therapy dog and the petting of the dog while the victim's testifying. But a lot of that was laid to rest by many judges that said, look, the jury can be outside the presence when we bring the victim and the dog in. And it's really one of those feel-good bills that passed, and much support with a lot of the both sides, Democrats and Republicans, on the House Judiciary Committee, as well as the Cringer Committee in the Senate. Okay, Lauren, go ahead.
So the next sort of portion that we're going to talk about now is started ahead of the Texas legislative session through the sunset review process, which happens during interim sessions. So in between each legislative session, the sunset the sunset committee reviews agencies and the programs that agencies are working under, and decides whether or not these programs are necessary to continue, whether or not the agency itself needs to continue. And this year, or in 2020, the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation was under sunset review. And one very important program that all of our organizations really pay a lot of attention to is the Texas Licensed Breeder Program. It's was created and passed into law in 2011, and essentially identifies which breeders need to have permits for operating. So it's a relatively high standard, a relatively high threshold as compared to other states across the country. So in Texas, if you're a breeder, you have to become licensed if you have 11 or more breeding females, or you sell 20 or more puppies each year. So that's a really high standard. The USDA standard is 5 breeding females, and you have to sell puppies sight unseen. So for example, online, or if you sell to pet stores. So although the program has its issues, it is the primary way that Texas is able to monitor larger commercial breeders. So during this sunset staff review, which is the first component of the sunset process, the staff actually recommended to cut the licensed breeder program from TDLR's programming. As soon as we got word that summer, of course, in the midst of COVID, we got word that the Texas Licensed Breeder Program was going to be cut, and THLN, HSUS, and a couple of other organizations that work in Texas really rallied to file comments and have our advocates file comments to the TDLR to push back to oppose the staff's decision to cut the breeder program. One thing that's, I think, really important to note in all of our work related to especially companion animals, dogs and cats, the American Kennel Club was in support of cutting the Texas Licensed Breeder Program. And I think that that's important to note, because the American Kennel Club is an opponent of most of the legislation and the rules that we work on. Even whenever we are working on very basic, very common sense standards of care work, the AKC opposes that. And that's in large part because they earn a significant portion of their revenue, their money, from registering breeders. So they oppose they oppose efforts to strengthen standards of care at breeder facilities. So it's definitely clear to us and to TDLR staff and the Sunset Committee that the licensed breeder program, because of that high threshold and the requirement that at least 20 puppies have to be sold, the program could stand to be strengthened, right? We could lower the threshold of breeding females so that more breeders fall under the umbrella of the Texas Licensed Breeders Program. And we also, think that it's almost impossible to track whether or not a breeder has sold 20 puppies. So those are a couple of things we know need to change, but it was very important to keep this bill or this program in place. And we successfully were able to ensure that the licensed breeder program was not part of the 2021 sunset package.
And Lauren, if I can, just to give you guys an understanding of, what we do in our jobs. So it was 4:00 on a Saturday, and there were less than 48 hours before the end of session. And I call up Lauren and I'm like, Lauren, the new sunset bill came out because, there's all these different changes and things happen at the last minute. And I said, we need to read this 472-page sunset bill now, because I just heard and learned that inspections were taken out. And inspections are really the most important process, because if these places aren't inspected, then really what's the point of the program, right? You can say, I have 5 dogs and they're in great condition. You go to the place and there's 100 dogs and, they have open sores or one has a broken leg. So we had to, at the very, very end, read over 400 pages and see that inspections were taken out. I mean, this is really complicated stuff. But I feel like I earned my law degree that when we found that, someone's sneaky down there, remove these, the inspections. So that can happen as well. And, Lauren, just an example, and I want to say that these pictures are not from Maltese Acres and everything, but this is an example of why breeders need to be regulated. And Lauren, right now, if you want to tell them where you are with a bunch of roosters trying to get them adopted that were seized from a cockfight. But, why do breeders need to be regulated?
So, I think that there are a myriad of reasons, but the most important reason for inspections at the state level, especially, is because if the Texas Licensed Breeder Program were to go away, and at the state level, we no longer did inspections, we no longer regulated, then we would be relying exclusively on the United States Department of Agriculture, on the USDA's program, which is not a very effective inspection program, to be frank. I mean, we know this. There are something like 80 inspectors for the entire country for the USDA, and they are responsible for inspecting tens of thousands of animals across the country. So naturally, things fall through the cracks. So there are facilities that they claim, like you can see in this bottom photo, they claim to have well-treated animals, that animals that are not kept in cages, animals that are loved, the parents are loved, they're, adorable and cute and fluffy in the photos that they advertise. But then if you go to the facility where these animals are being bred, more often than not, in larger facilities especially, what you see are dogs that spend their entire lives in wire bottom cages with females being bred at every single breeding cycle. And without Texas inspectors going in, we see USDA continuing to license and continuing to allow facilities with really egregious welfare issues continuing to operate. So it's an important component to make sure that these breeding facilities are not operating under the radar. And, we're going to talk a little bit in a little bit about House Bill 1818, the pet store bill, but this is not only an animal welfare issue. You know, we're not only talking about how these dogs are kept, but it's also a consumer protection issue. Nobody wants to be the person that buys a puppy from a puppy mill. But when the puppy mill breeders are allowed to advertise as if they are small mom and pop humane breeders, then what happens is Texans end up buying puppy mill puppies without realizing what's going on.
And I think it's just important to note too, imagine during COVID, USDA was doing virtual inspections.
Yeah.
So again, it's just very simple, to hide certain things when the person isn't there on the ground and, looking at these animals. And then, just to quickly go back to this slide, but if you look there on the left, before the breeder program, a lot of the attorneys on the call may or may not remember the Kaufman County raid. So it's 20 miles from Dallas, and there were 550 dogs that were seized. And in addition to that, before the breeder program, because that was in 2009, within 2 years, the same breeder had already amassed 70 more dogs. And guess who paid for all that? The taxpayers and humane societies and nonprofits. So this is a very important program, and we are happy that it was saved. So to move on, exotic ownership, this was a bill that was very interesting because Texas, to their credit, and Texas Parks and Wildlife saw an issue that was happening in other states and decided to try to fix it before it became a huge issue here. So what happens is people buy exotic pets. Sometimes they buy exotic snakes and they don't realize how big they become, right? AKA a python. So what people were doing, instead of euthanizing these pets that they no longer wanted, they just would dump them into the different parks and areas of Florida. And so what happened is the Burmese python actually now is the apex predator and has taken over huge parts of the Everglades, which is really bad for a variety of reasons. So because of certain reptile shows that were coming to Texas Parks and Wildlife noticed these animals. This is a picture of Texas Parks and Wildlife biologists that found this Burmese python in Texas. And so what they were trying to do is stop the problem before it came. So 2326 amends the Parks and Wildlife Code to expand the scope. And they're just basically requiring you to get a permit, right? And if you're a commercial seller, there are different regulations, but they do move it from a class C to a class B, which truly is upping the penalties, which makes it more, you have to be on the lookout and make sure that you're not doing this kind of purchasing and then dumping the animal. And I can tell you, Lauren, I don't know if you saw this, but there was a recent article about people that let their goldfish out in ponds in Minnesota, and how now in several lakes in Minnesota, it's a huge problem because they come in, they're not indigenous, and they really screw up the biology of the lakes. Similar, I'm sure you guys have seen with zebra mussels and whatnot. So we just really need to be careful, and this is a step in the right direction.
Another big one in Texas, Shelby, are the Placo catfish. Have you ever seen those Placos? Or they're like little bitty when you get them for your fish tank, and they clean the they clean the algae off your fish tank, and then people dump them, and then they turn into these like giant catfish. It's amazing how many issues we have with basically abandoned exotic pets. So this bill was really exciting.
Good. And I agree. This is the microchip scam bill. So, at this point, this is a good bill. And we will see if it has teeth, if rules are promulgated under Texas Department of Health and Safety. But basically, this says if you get a dog in your possession or a cat, you need to microchip them. And why do we want to do microchipping? Well, 4 of the 5 largest cities in Texas have all gone to microchipping. I'm sure you guys, if you have dogs or cats, some of you might have the collar with the old tag, for rabies, and, certain cities require that. But quite frankly, the tag is just as good as a t-shirt. And, if your t-shirt's not on you, you have no identification. So the point is this, we really want people to start microchipping their animals. It is the easiest way to get animals back. In the city of Dallas, where DAYL is, I'm a shelter commissioner, and one of the biggest problems is loose owned animals, where, you know, the animals get out, and instead of them coming into the shelter, Lauren, I'm sure you've seen through your shelter partners, they now can scan them in the field and then bring them back to the home so that they don't even have to enter a shelter. In the summer, City of Dallas Animal Shelter gets up to 700 to 800 dogs and cats per week. Well, imagine if you have a microchip and even 150 they can bring back to those houses, then those animals never entered the shelter. So it's a really good law. It's shall, it's not must, but we'll see if some rules come behind this. There was some opposition from some smaller shelters saying that microchips and the scanners are incredibly expensive, but there also are a lot of granting programs with it as well. So this was a really good bill that also passed, removing dangerous animals from certain situations. And I'm going to go ahead and give an example first of why this is important. So in February 2016 in Denton, there was an abuser there. She was arrested after 71 animals were seized from her 2-bedroom apartment, 46 guinea pigs, 7 rats, 6 ferrets. They had food and water, but there were inches of feces. And we know this because we know the shelter employee that worked on that case. And then all those animals ended up going to HSNT. But there was a civil seizure under the Texas civil seizure law. Well, 4 years later, that same abuser had actually now, she had to be arrested on cruelty charges because she had over 200 animals living in her house. And I believe 121 of those animals were alive and around 80 were dead. But we're talking about cage flooring that was covered in feces, cockroaches. If you talk to the shelter worker that actually remembered this woman, remembered going back, she said it was the worst seizure she had ever had. And then when she ended up in front of another judge, none of the judges know that you actually can have a do not contact after you've been convicted of animal cruelty. So this bill basically tries to limit any kind of contact when you're serving your probation, or even as part of your probation. You can't own or be in the presence of certain animals. And it's a good example. You know, Lauren, I'm sure you've seen that hoarders, it's really, we don't want to punish people and put them in jail for having a mental disease such as hoarding animals. Unfortunately, the recidivism rate is basically 99%, and it's terrible. But we're trying to at least to limit the contact. And I'm sure you've seen that in your seizures.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't have anything extra to add because that's spot on. We don't want people to be jailed, but we also want to make sure that animals, that no more animals get into that situation. And without the mental health resources to help people recover from hoarding, which is an actual mental health condition, then, you know, the best thing that we can do is just try and make sure that they don't have access.
Exactly. And now they require the defendant to relinquish custody, prohibit the defendant from possessing or exercising control over these animals, and then require them to participate in counseling or other treatment, which is great. Okay, Lauren, this is yours.
So this is the bill I mentioned earlier about House Bill 1818. It was a bill that would have essentially passed a law that we call, a sort of humane pet store law. So right now there are virtually no regulations over pet stores in Texas and where they source their puppies from. So there are, a couple dozen, I think like just under 50 pet stores in Texas that would have been impacted by this bill. Many of them selling puppies that are coming from out of state, really large puppy mills. So I'm talking about mills from Missouri, from Iowa, from Kansas, where the puppy mills have, 100 to 400 dogs on site. So there's absolutely no possibility of humane breeding or humane care of those animals. So these pet stores ship in these dogs from out of state. Many of the dogs are, they're not vaccinated. They are sick. They have all sorts of communicable diseases. And then they show up at the pet stores, and people in Texas buy these puppies without knowing what's been going on with those puppies. And we have had, dozens of people in our state reported, so likely more because there are many issues with underreporting in this particular area, of families taking sick puppies home from these pet stores and then having to not only pay the sometimes upwards of $10,000 for the puppy to begin with, but then also thousands of dollars in veterinary care. And in many instances, families actually end up having to put the puppies down. So House Bill 1818 would have required pet stores to, if they're going to sell puppies, to only sell puppies that are coming from what we have identified as humane sources. So that would be puppies coming from animal shelters, from nonprofit rescues, or from municipal or county animal control facilities. So that would have not only stopped or severely limited the flow of out-of-state puppy mill puppies into the state of Texas, it would have also made our puppy selling pet stores a really positive part of our communities that are always dealing with pet overpopulation, homeless pet overpopulation. Shelby mentioned earlier that in DAS, that in Dallas, DAS might take in, what did you say, upwards of 500-600 animals a week?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so on top of all of these homeless animals that DAS and all the local nonprofit rescues are dealing with, there's multiple pet stores that are bringing in thousands of puppy mill puppies into Dallas and the surrounding communities every year. So it's really not a sustainable or effective way for us to be dealing with dog overpopulation issues in Texas. It would have the bill, House Bill 1818 by Representative Patterson out of Frisco, would have only impacted counties 200,000 that had a population of 200,000 or more. So really getting at these urban and suburban areas where the pet stores are, historically have been most prevalent. And so it would have impacted approximately 30 of the 50 or so stores in Texas that we know sell puppies. So this has been although this bill was brought really without, it wasn't brought by any particular organization. This truly was a constituent-driven bill from advocates in Frisco. HSUS and other organizations have been working on similar bills in other states. Illinois, California, and Maryland have all passed similar laws requiring the humane sourcing of puppies in pet stores. So this bill was kind of a surprise to all of us, but we all rallied together and it got significantly farther along in the process than we thought it would. Representative Patterson was an incredible champion for this bill. It got all the way through the House, all the way through the Senate, and was in the process of going through, Shelby, what's the committee?
Conference committee.
Thank you, conference committee. I was thinking calendars committee. So basically the versions of the bill that came out of the House and the Senate were different. And so when that happens, members of the Senate and the House have to get together in conference committee and come up with a version of the bill that's acceptable to the House and the Senate. And then both chambers have to vote on the conference committee version one more time. So we got to the level of conference committee, and before the bill, we essentially just ran out of time. Anything else to add, Shelby?
I just think it's important that Jared Patterson, who brought this bill, was just named one of the most conservative Republicans of Texas. So again, it just goes back to that. It doesn't matter your party if it's a good bill. And, he was a really good champion. In addition, it will be interesting, I think, because of this and the success of it getting through the House, which has become the most difficult chamber down there. I think we'll probably see some cities implementing, these types of bans as well. There are, I think, around a handful of cities right now, San Antonio being one of them, that banned this because of all the reasons Lauren stated. So we'll definitely watch this space. Yeah. Okay, so the Safe Outdoor Dogs Act, this is a bill that had 101 co-authors and sponsors. It's been brought for 2015, 17, and 19. You know, there are only 150 members in the House. And in the House, it had around 90 co-authors. So, and you only need 76 to get through. And then the Senate, it had several authors and sponsors as well. And here's what this bill does. There was a law in 2007 and it passed, and it is really difficult to use. And if you talk to any city attorney or municipal judge, they have decided not to use the law because it's unenforceable. It requires this 24-hour warning. And THLN did a Public Information Act request, I think back in 2016, and we found not a single ticket had been issued in all 1,100 cities on the 2007 law. It just wasn't effective and it wasn't enforceable. And so if your judge is saying, well, I'm not gonna prosecute on these tickets, again, they're like $50, $100, depending on the fine, then why even write a ticket, right? So we've been trying to fix this law because it defines adequate shelter and requires water. Why do you need the definition for adequate shelter? Well, you need it so the dog owner knows exactly what they're required to have for their dogs. And again, these are permanently tethered dogs that basically they live their life outside. And then also that the animal control officer knows. So the definition of adequate shelter is really important, and that's coming specifically from the law enforcement agencies. It removes chains as a method of restraint. If you have a tow truck tire chain that's way too heavy and usually injures and is inhumane to the dog, if you have one of just a chain link kind of type chain, they rust and break. And so it was removing chains as a method, and it also removes the 24-hour waiting warning period so that tickets are allowed at the scene. For example, you have a habitual offender that never has water in their dog's dog bowl. And, you guys might have a neighbor like this, and the dog just looks like it's in pain. It looks, it's lethargic. It's laying there. What is it going to be today? Not too bad, but in the summer in Texas, it can get up to 105. And the animal control officer goes out, sees this, they have to write a warning. The next day they come back, there's water in the bowl. 2 days later, there's no more water. So it's really for those habitual offenders that, have their dogs out there for, alarm systems, don't really care. And that is what this law was going after. It was supported by the Texas Sheriff's Association, Texas Animal Control Association. These are the individuals that wrote the bill. And we just tried to help them pass it. And there's a lot of grants available also for the tie-out cables. But unfortunately, it was vetoed by Greg Abbott. I'm sorry, the veto's a little, can't really read it. But basically, he said that it was micromanaging and overcriminalization. THLN, we put out a statement that just said we respectfully disagree. It was a bill that was crafted specifically by law enforcement and by all different types of legislators. Remember, 42 of them being Republican, so that we could actually help these dogs. And what really brought this issue out and why we had so much support this session was because of Snowvid, right? Unfortunately, hundreds of dogs died throughout the state because they didn't have a doghouse and they were outside freezing. And we were just getting inundated from calls from sheriffs to deputies to law enforcement saying, what do we do? And, actually this would have prevented overcriminalization in those cases, because the people that didn't take their dogs in and they died now are being prosecuted for animal cruelty, right? So this just goes up to the severity and neglect and issuing tickets. And again, it's all about education. I'm sure the city of Dallas doesn't want to seize any more dogs as they're dealing with all the dogs and cats they already have. But it was very frustrating. Some really bad things came out of it. Some hashtags against the governor that we don't represent or, did not start at all. This was a policy issue and we just respectfully disagreed. Hopefully it will be back in the next session because of the support surrounding it. This bill died as well. We have a law currently that does not allow breed specific legislation, but in an effort to understand dog bites, this law would have required that each shelter report on the date and county in which the dog bite happened, the age of the victim, the breed of the dog, extent of injuries, and hospitalization. I put this chart up because I teach animal law at SMU, and I have my students look at this and we study it for a little bit. And I say, okay, which one is the pit bull in this? Because if you've ever read, and I know Lauren knows this too, 9 times out of 10, when you read a police report, it says pit bull mix. And I like to put this up there because every single student gets it wrong. Now, they are not animal control officers and they're not seen, but truly, until you do those DNA test dogs for your animals, you really do not know the breed. And again, it just goes back to certain legislation regarding certain breeds that truly is unfair and gives certain dogs a bad rap. So this bill passed, but it was identification of dogs through dog bites, and it made it through the Senate, got over to the House and died. And Lauren, I'm sure you'd agree. Do you know the pit bull on that page?
Let's see.
Love for everyone to guess. It's already 12:47.
Okay, we should keep going. No, what number is it? Will you tell us at the end?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
I'll come back to it. Okay, Lauren, this is yours.
Okay, so HSUS's priority legislation for the last few sessions has been around the regulation of exotic and dangerous wild animals in Texas. So we have a law on the books already in Texas Health and Safety Code 822 subchapter E that requires people who want to own animals like tigers, mountain lions, and other animals, other large dangerous animals as pets, have to register them, and also gave cities and counties the ability to prohibit the private possession entirely of animals like tigers. So this session, we worked on a bill that unfortunately did not pass on prohibiting not only private possession of these animals, but also and expanding the list of animals covered under the Dangerous Wild Animal Law, but also to prohibit public contact in commercial facilities with these same species. So public contact is, essentially some examples are taking pictures with tiger cubs. I'm sure we all saw at least part of Tiger King when it came out during COVID, and the facility that makes all of its money off of having people come in for tiger cub petting. So that's an example of public contact. Pictures with primates, with the monkeys sitting on your shoulders, offering elephant rides and other sorts of interactions with elephants. These are all examples of public contact with animals. And at the federal level, this is a highly, highly underregulated activity. While facilities that offer public contact generally do have to be USDA licensed, there's similar to the puppy mill issue, there are many, many USDA licensed exhibitors that have years of records of abuses of animals, unsafe handling, and even dangerous incidents where people have been injured, but they continue to operate under the USDA licensing. So this is an example of Texas. There have been 4 tigers seized from private owners in the last year. This is a little photograph of Elsa, who was seized during snowpocalypse last year from San Antonio. So we have a lot of examples, a lot of big cats, especially being owned in commercial facilities that are not AZA accredited zoos or ZAA accredited zoos, and not in sanctuaries or rescues. They're private possession commercial facilities where they're offering opportunities to directly interact with these animals. And We know that this is bad for the animal. For example, tiger cubs that are pulled from their moms at, only a couple of days old, often end up sick, they end up malnourished, and they end up abused by the people who handle them. And when with elephants and primates, the AZA stopped offering, or the AZA recommended that AZA accredited facilities stop offering elephant rides in 2011 after a slew of elephants injured and killed zookeepers and people that were interacting with those elephants. We know that offering direct contact with elephants is an incredibly dangerous activity and is just an accident or death waiting to happen. In Texas, big cats, either those being possessed privately or those in facilities, have killed or injured 4 children and many adults since about 1990, when HSUS and others started keeping track of this. And we often get questions about one of the big pushbacks against all of this dangerous wild animal legislation are people who own monkeys, and why do we need to regulate monkeys? Especially the larger primates are already regulated. You can't own a chimpanzee, you can't own a gorilla, but the smaller primates like macaques, which are, relatively common, and at least in terms of exotic pet ownership, those are not currently covered under Texas law. And so one thing we've been pushing is to include macaques in this dangerous wild animal statute. And that's because 27% of injuries caused by captive primates across the country have been caused by macaques. And that's including deaths and macaques transferring or transmitting herpes B virus to humans, which can be fatal. So unfortunately, this kind of similar to the Safe Outdoor Dogs bill, this was the 4th session that we worked on this issue. Again, we have the support of Texas Sheriff's Association, of Texas Animal Control Association, of many cities and counties who have experienced the issues and have not yet been successful, but will continue to push for this.
Yeah, and the sheriffs obviously support it because, they're the ones that are called to the scene if a tiger escapes. Also, through Public Information Act requests, people just can't believe you can own a tiger or any of the animals that Lauren has mentioned. But I will never go to Seguin, Texas, because there are a ton of tigers there. And I don't know, it just scares me to death knowing that. Really quickly, because we're running out of time, federally, there's the Big Cat Public Safety Act right now. It's the farthest it's ever gone. This would prohibit private possession and breeding of big cats. And this is the federal bill. So if you guys are in support of this type of legislation, please call Ted Cruz and or John Cornyn and tell them you support it, because it's incredibly important. Last but not least, there was a bill that was filed. It's been filed now 3 sessions, and it basically relates to civil liability for removing animals from a motor vehicle. It's been brought every session. If you guys see a dog in a hot car this summer, we have a 1-800 hotline, and we get calls on this all the time. If you're in a strip mall area, or in front of a grocery store, I always go in and ask the person to make an announcement. I don't know if you guys remember 2 years ago, there was a judge in Waxahachie that left her dog in a car, and it was, she was actually pretty embarrassed about it because the car was not turned on, and she got some heat on social media over it. But the point is, this bill probably won't pass. People don't think that you should be able to break into someone else's car to save an animal. There are 2 state representatives on the floor that always kill this bill. But at the end of the day, it is important legislation simply, and it has passed in other states. Yeah. But again, to get the flip side, TACA was very concerned, Texas Animal Control Association, because in Texas, if you walk out of a store and see someone breaking into your car, you can shoot them. So they did not support this legislation. Anyways, we kind of ended, we have 5 minutes. Lauren, what I propose is if you guys happy to take questions, we had a video clip, but there are a lot of other bills that we could have talked about today. I don't think we have time. If this interests you, we're happy to put on maybe a part 2 in the fall or in the spring or something. If this at all interests you, I don't think we have time for the video clip if there are any questions, but Blair, let us know. We're happy to take them.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Let's go ahead and show the clip. But just in case we get cut off, I just want to thank y'all for all this information today, and thanks to everyone for joining us. Don't forget to get the CLE number out of the chat before it ends. But y'all can go ahead and show the clip.
Okay, Lauren, while I'm setting it up, do you want to tell them what they're about to watch?
Yeah, so this is a clip of the House Bill 1818 during the Business and Industry Committee on Business and Industry hearing that took place this session, and this was a really interesting committee hearing because the opposition to House Bill 1818 really were not very well prepared, which surprised all of us. And so who you're about to see is, I know I emailed you his name, Shelby, and now I'm spacing. He's from Miami, and he is the representative, the lawyer for one of the companies. And he really comes in and kind of gives you a good example of who our real opposition is for House Bill 1818, which is the Humane Pet Store Bill.
Attorney, I represent the owners of the Petland franchise in Tyler, Texas. And if I can just start with one thing, internet sales are already high.
Are you testifying on or against the bill?
Testifying against, but I want to celebrate the fact that this is being brought. I mean, this has a very, very well-intentioned design. So first of all, internet sales are already high because there are fewer pet stores. So people are reaching out to illegitimate means. The other issue is that Miami-Dade Animal Services will tell you that the vast majority of dogs in their shelters are not from pet stores. These are other strays, but they don't find, and Alex Munoz, who is the head of Miami-Dade County Animal Services, will tell you that they don't see many dogs from pet stores that come into their shelter as strays. So this is a very
okay, good... So I want to clarify that. You said Miami-Dade. I see on the registration you're from Miami.
Yes, sir.
So, right. So that's an interesting piece of information. We're talking about what's happening in Texas right now. So
I understand that, but I'm just giving you a comparison because if you look at the demographics of Miami-Dade, it's very similar to Dallas. So you can, on the size and the scope and everywhere in that county area, you can make a lot of comparisons to how, for instance, Dallas would work, definitely Houston. So, this is a wonderful idea. I think we all want to ban puppy mills. The issue is that you are going to have unintended consequences. You are going to have black market dogs. You are going to have internet sales. And we don't know where those come from. I think the important thing to do is a regulation. One of the things that nobody suggested here, and I'm kind of shocked, is you have the ability to decide what dogs come into your state. You can decide what breeders sell to your stores. You really sees them. I've got
that kind of regulatory structure that you can think of to...
At all, you'd be the first, and you'd be a trail.
So I'm going to fast forward to some, there's just 2 minutes left, but I'm going to fast forward to some of the representatives and their questions.
And also what he just said is false. So the regulatory structure that he just described is illegal. It's unconstitutional. So they're recommending these unconstitutional fixes.
In Washington, and we've had conversations, they don't have the financial...
Pets sick with parvo there with us?
No.
Okay. There it is.
Part of the process, but not all of them have the financial whereabouts to do what some commercial breeders can do, especially if we raise the standards of commercial breeders.
Number 2 question. Representative Rodriguez.
Thank you so much for your testimony. You said that you're representing whom again?
I represent a Petland franchisee from Tyler, Texas.
Tyler, Texas.
And he has stores in Florida as well.
Okay. I just wanted to raise a few concerns with your testimony.
Absolutely.
And I don't think you're being fully honest with this body, with the public. I'm currently looking at a report from the SPCA that did an investigation on Petland in Tyler. Are you familiar with this?
No?
Okay. So this was a report that was given to this body. And it was in 2018.
Yes.
And this was sworn statements from 45 customers and 29 former employees.
Yes.
And in here it states that former Petland employees and managers personally witnessed consistent loss of life. 22 dogs, puppies, 5 cats, kittens died within her 18 months of employment. Employees were forced to knowingly sell pets sick with parvo, blindness, being prohibited from disclosing to customers. So it's
atrocious.
It's concerning.
And when my client.
So anyways, I know we're out of time, but we just wanted to show that as that's what some of the hearing can tend to look like. And man, if you're testifying, you better be ready because they have their facts and figures behind them. So that's it from us. Thank you so much. Lauren, any parting words?
Nope, nothing else. Thank you guys for being here and for listening. And I can guarantee that we will have just as many exciting and contentious bills to talk about in 2023. So, and also happy to do a part 2. I mean, there's all sorts of wildlife bills and other animal issues that we didn't, affordable housing, other issues that we didn't even get to today.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, again, thanks Shelby and Lauren.
Thanks, y'all.
And don't forget to get the CLE number out of the chat.
Okay.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank
Bye.
you.